In this video, we're going to look at a normalization exercise that takes a look at data for borrowers taking books out of a library. So the information includes the date borrowed, the date the book is due, the date it was returned, a borrower ID, first name, last name of the borrower's like status. So I'm here at a university, so faculty, staff have could borrow books for longer than students or something. Something to identify the book, the title of the book. Then we have some author information. That's in parentheses because just to represent that the book may have more than one author. And then the library may have more than one copy of a book. So there is a book copy. Okay. And now we want to start figuring out for this table what we think the primary key would be. So the primary key, we're going to look through the library's records of people borrowing books, and we should be able to pick out a row uniquely. Then if we some set of fields which would allow us to identify a row uniquely and look up all the other fields, that will make for us a primary key. One rule of thumb um, is that anything that is repeated is going to need to make some kind of appearance. So this book that's being borrowed may have multiple authors. And so if I want all that information, each individual author spelled out in a flattened table, then I'm going to need author. So I know that's going to be part of it, author ID. Now let's think through this situation. We have books being borrowed. So there are people borrowing books. Okay. So, and we have to think about sort of multiplicity. So on a, the borrower uh, may borrow many books and a book may be borrowed by many people. So we have to expect there to be a borrower ID here and a book ID. I can't I can't figure out everything from can't spell borrower at all. Borrower. So I'm going to be able to sort of pick out the person and the book. Just knowing the person won't tell me the book. Just telling the book won't tell me the person. Just knowing the book is not going to tell me the author. So a book may have many authors, an author may write many books, a borrower may borrow many books, a book may have many borrowers. So I'm going to need all these things. They're not going to be unique. And then that person can take out that book multiple times. So we also are going to need, I'm just going to throw in the date borrowed. Okay. And then I'm sort of like duplicating like a class discussion that my class had. And so we were picking out the date the book was borrowed, uh, the borrower I the borrower ID, the book ID, the author ID. That should be enough. One thing that came up, so I'll discuss it now before I forget to, is because we're going to start doing functional dependencies below. Um, so I think this is good for any record in the table. But one thing that came up was sort of book ID. Did the book ID tell us the book copy, that's going to come up next to number two for our functional dependencies. And so you just ask those questions and then you come up with an answer for your situation. And other people, given this situation, may have a different answer, and that's okay. But the more important point is that you know to ask the question and then given your answer, based the how things depend based on your answer. So the class envisioned that book ID might be something like on the spine of the book, like a Library of Congress number, but also at the bottom included the copy number for the book. That might also be something that appeared on the spine. So it might have all this, Q5792, yada, 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 but it might also say copy two at the bottom. So uh, that's one thing that we're imagining. But I think we have enough here for the primary key. The book may be, the borrower may borrow many books, so we need both borrower and book. The book has many authors, so we need the author, and the person may borrow that book many times, so we'll need the date borrowed. Now let's start looking at functional dependence. So these things, all other fields have a functional dependence on these three, or four, sorry. But what about other possibilities? So let's do the easy ones first. The borrower ID is going to tell us the borrower first name and borrower last name. That seems so. This field and borrower status. So those all seem to depend on just borrower. The book ID is going to tell us the book title. And then what we were just saying, if you take the book ID to be like what's on the spine and includes the book copy, um, then we'll put the book copy here. And you might have said no, you might have said it was an ISBN number, and then the book copy would not have been decided by the book ID. So again, it depends what you mean by book ID. And in the discussion, I'm trying to duplicate. The decision was that it was part of the copy was indicated in the ID. The author ID is clearly going to give us the author information. So author F first name and last name. And what else have we got up here that we need to account for? So we talked about a book copy, author first name and last name, book title, borrower status, last name, first name, borrower. Okay. Date due and returned. So again, this in functional dependence, we're looking for things that you can just look up. So can I look up when the the date due? Um, that might depend on the book, uh, the borrower's status, and the date borrowed, or something like that. Um, or I just might say, so like all these things, and I throw out anything. I don't need the author, so I certainly don't need the. So I don't need the author here, but a certain book might not be able to be taken out for as long, so that might affect the due date. Um, the date borrowed certainly affects the due date. And the borrow has a status and might be able to take it out for longer. So I think maybe all those together um, would determine the date due and the date returned. Certainly, I'll know what book it was. The book ID again includes the copy information we're saying, the borrower ID, the date borrowed, all that should be able to tell us that for that borrowing when it was due, when it was returned. Okay. And now we're asking the next question along this line of we're going to second normal form. So our next question is, are these dependencies are these partial dependencies on the primary key? So we look here that our field that is determinant of other fields, the borrower ID determines, the book ID determines. So, and those were all, in this case, part. So borrower ID, that was part of the primary key. Book ID was part of the primary key. Author ID was part of the primary key. And date borrowed, borrower ID, book ID, that combination was part of the primary key. So in this case, the answer is, I'll just simply say all. They were all partials. And then second normal form says that after, we're just imagining in a flattened database, but after the database is flattened and put into the first normal form, then we should be pulling out this all this information into separate tables. So let's sort of copy this big table and start pulling things out of it. Control V, there we go. So we said what? That we should pull out a borrower, which would be a borrower ID determining a borrower first name and last name. And status, I forgot status. So I pulled out of the table, I kept the borrower ID in the table for my relationships, but I also pulled it out and then pulled out the fields that depended on it, the first name, the last name, and the status. So that took care of that. Now let's pull out book, which is book ID. And then I can sort of mark this if I want as the primary key, underline it, or make it bold, or put PK after it. I think I do a different notation each time, but book ID determined book copy. And we said with our choice, also the book copy. Okay, the book title and the book copy. And so we were pulling that information out, book title out, but book ID in. And then we said what there was an author, and that's going to be author ID, author first name, author last name. Those are pulled out. And now the relationship is book to author. We always have to think of our multiplicity. A book, an author writes many books, and a book can be written by many authors. One more time, an author can write many books, many, and a book can be written by many authors. So I usually try to say it in both directions, always started with a and then using one or many. In this case, both were many, so it's a many to many relationship. And so I know I'm going to need a bridge table of like book author. I'm just going to have my book ID and my author ID. And so that information, all the author information, if I know the library, I'll want to know the book that they've taken out. Then I will go, knowing the book, I'll go to the book author and relate it to the author. So that is pulling all that out. And so I pulled the author stuff out and but put back in the relationship. And so what do I have? I have the borrower, I have the book, I have the author, I have the book author, and then I have the library. And the library has the borrower, the book, and the date. And I leave, I think, the date due and date returned, sort of in that borrowing table. So this uh, library, or you could call it library transaction, or you could call it borrowing. Um, so there is the sort of some things left in the original table, the book ID, the borrower ID to relate to the borrower, the book ID to relate to the book, and the date borrowed because that same person might borrow that same book multiple times. So I need a date, and then the due date and the return date we will keep in that table. Um, sort of let me move these first because I'm considering those part of my primary key, and then these after. And so let me mark those as, I mean, I might at this stage want to introduce like library transaction ID, or I could stick with my composite. So for these purposes, I'll just stick with my composite primary key, but I might want to, um, in the long run, introduce an ID, especially for the transaction. When there are small bridge tables, I'll often just leave them with a composite primary key. But up here, once it gets to be sort of three things, I might want to introduce here like some library transaction ID. But this is what I wanted to show. Just another example. It takes a lot of these to get sort of used to it. Identified a primary key. Can I identify a row uniquely? How many things do I need? Do I have everything will depend on this subset, on this, but what about other dependencies? Here are other dependencies we identified. Were any of them partials? Well, they all were partials. So second normal form says start pulling things out. Pull out a borrower, pull out a book, pull out an author. Always watch your relationships, especially their multiplicity. There was a book author was a many to many relationship. And then when that all got pulled out, don't don't neglect the original table because it has the essential relationship here of the borrower borrowing the book on a certain day. All right, that's what I wanted to do on this one. Thanks for your attention.